as I've been writing about anything, which is, I suppose, from my kind of mid to late teens, about 20 years now. And in fact, I was thinking, so I'm 38 now. When I was 18, I wrote a very long poem about one of London's lost rivers, the River Effra, which is a river that, for those of you who know South London, flows through Norwood, Dulwich, Brixton, Vauxhall, all areas that I know really well, areas that I grew up in. And I suppose that obsession with the kind of hidden landscapes of London probably emanates from that time. However, the shorter story of writing London Clay comes from about 10 years ago, maybe eight or 9 years actually, when I was invited by the climate change arts organisation Cape Farewell to be their kind of resident poet for a year. They described it as the national green poet, and I just thought, I don't think I could take on a national anything or be green enough, and poet I'm just getting comfortable with. So I said instead, can I actually write about something I've always been excited about, and that is the landscapes of London. So I sort of returned to stuff that I've been writing about as a teenager, and that's really where the book came from. I made a series of, as you said in your intro, perambulatory audio walks down some of London's lost rivers, and those became the first couple of chapters in the book. But really, the lost rivers are the kind of they're the kind of the sexy headlines of London's hidden landscapes. Everyone wants to know about the River Fleet and the Walbrook and the Effra, but actually I wanted the book to engage with a lot more than just the lost rivers, and to consider the entire hidden topography and landscape of London by starting from the geological map of London. So that's what I did, 8 or 9 years ago. I bought a Street Finder map, and I have it here. It's like an artifact. It's falling apart, and I take absolutely no pleasure in this. I mean, it's in bits. Hammersmith has floated off, and this street map, I basically spent hours colouring it in, like a primary school kid, drawing all the geological layers of London, the alluvium, the silt, the sand, and of course the London clay that is underneath it all. And that became the kind of compass for writing the book.
Well, okay, Tom, so at the outset, did you envisage that it would run for so long? It's, I make it sound as though that's too long, but I don't mean that at all. It's about 400 pages there, isn't it?
It's quite long, yeah. I mean, maybe there's something there about working with an editor during a pandemic. Everyone wants to get away with less work, so they just say, yeah, that's fine, 400 pages. Yeah, I mean, I think like any book, you're not quite sure what you're going to get until you finished it, and I think that's a fine principle. Often, if you're a writer, and for those writers tuning in, often there's the assumption that agents and publishers desire this kind of perfect plan that you're going to realise step by step in a completely structured way and hit every target. There are loads of things that I set out to do and didn't do, partly because of the pandemic and partly for other reasons. But there are lots of things I did do as well. And I mean, it's quite digressive as a book, so I suppose that lends itself to length. I wanted to be able to include, some quite weird and wonderful stories of some of the people who as it were, have gone before me in mapping London. Yeah, I mean, I did get a bit carried away, Andrew. Let's put it that way.
No, well, I enjoyed every word, so don't worry, that was great. I mean, what we try to do with these Walking Writers Salons is actually to get underneath and find a bit more about the writing process, and you've already started that off. And something that you asked me, in a sense, you said you didn't want to talk too much about, so I promised there will be just this one question.
Sure.
But Tom's day job is that he is a publisher. So, I'm just guessing that you probably knew what was popular and what might not be popular. But how much preparatory planning did you do around the structure of the book itself? Was there a lot of planning?
Just well, first of all, just to take the thing about kind of popularity and trends, if you like. I mean, God, everything is so relative. It might be that within the relatively small world of kind of walking arts and psychogeography, that this kind of work is almost quite passé. But there are also vast readerships and potential readerships of all sorts of stuff who haven't yet encountered things. So when I go and talk to people about the Lost Rivers of London, maybe 1 out of 10 people will know all about it, and explain it back to me, but the other 9 won't. So I think that there are still lots of different ways to tell stories, and you have to stick to your guns. My writing practice has always been driven by curiosity, and perhaps a little bit by obscurity. And there have been some barriers along the way. I had an agent for a couple of years who basically completely neglected me and refused to answer emails and would give me the worst advice, and made me feel really crappy about my work, and would say things like, I'm not sure whether you should write this book because I think the market for London history books is saturated, stuff like that, which is just complete rubbish. So ultimately, you just have to stick to your guns, whether it's trendy or not. And I certainly didn't set out to write into a particular kind of fashionable space, if you like. I also didn't know whether I could do it. I knew that I could write, because I wrote some proposal chapters quite early on. I knew I could write a couple of proposal chapters. I didn't know whether I could sustain interest over 10 chapters or 400 pages. And of course, I still don't know, because it's not my book anymore. It becomes owned by the people who read it and respond to it in their own way. So yeah, it's always a risk, and you're just hoping to take as many people along with you on the journey, in terms of publishers and so on. In terms of the structure of it, so you asked about that as well. That was probably the hardest bit of the book, working out the structure, working out the kind of premise for each chapter, because I didn't want it to feel like you'd follow me walking down a lost river, something would happen, the chapter would end, and then we'd be back somewhere else, just doing the same thing again. I didn't want to start repeating myself and repeating the kind of tropes of walking the lost rivers or walking the lost islands or wherever. So for each chapter, I tried to think really carefully about how I could characterize that landscape in a different way, how I could also incorporate some of my own personal biography, if you like, into the chapter to try and give it something new. And of course, struggling with this structure as I went along, in came March 2020 and the pandemic, and then suddenly the structure was shifted, and in a sense was given I think a reprieve, because in that terrible time, the city was suddenly empty. And so every walk I did from then on, and in fact there were 2 of them really, Bermondsey and the River Lee, I was faced with an empty city, and of course you can write about that. There are interesting things to be said about that, and the pressure of being at home with 2 small kids during the lockdown. So yeah, in a sense I was quite lucky to have that opportunity to write about lockdown.
Well, I mean, the other thing that obviously draws us to you and vice versa sort of thing is that there's a lot of walking involved in this book, and I'm kind of keen to find out what kind of proportion of time in terms of, or what type of research were you doing in the library, and what were you doing out and about on foot? Was it all about out and about on foot, or were the visits to the library?
I think the only visits to libraries were to work actually in the libraries, to write rather than to research. The bulk of my desk research, if you like, was done either on the internet or through books that I already had or bought, and some of that is quite basic, publicly available history. Some of it is also quite obscure, and the internet helps a great deal in that, because so many old and obscure books are now available online. I also used mapping an awful lot, both the mapping that I'd done personally kind of by hand, and also using websites like Layers of London, layersoflondon.com, I suppose, or .org, which is a great resource for anyone who's interested in peeling back the layers and seeing what London was like. You can layer up maps, so you can have kind of Ordnance Survey map from the 1920s, on a 20% transparency against, John Rock's map of 1746, and you compare, lines in the landscape and work out what's
don't
happened.
spoil it. Don't spoil it. I thought you were out there with both maps.
Well, yeah. So it's a great question, because my answer is that I did obviously a lot of desk research, as it were, reading, but I also did a huge amount of walking. And it wasn't like it happened, I do all the research and then I do the walking, or vice versa. I would do multiple walks, and I'd be researching almost simultaneously, or in the gaps. So that the walking and the research were kind of additive. And that was a really interesting way of doing it, because it meant that I was discovering things at odd times. So I would, walk a landscape, not notice anything, read some research, and realize, oh yeah, I just walked past that amazing thing. And then, and equally, I would find odd things in the landscape and then go and research them and discover that they were nothing interesting, or indeed that there was a huge story behind it. So it was very kind of bitty in that respect. But I think probably by chapter 4 or 5, I really got into the swing of that particular way of doing things, and that's just how it happened with this book. I think every book needs to have a unique structure applied to it that is reflective of the content and the priorities of the work itself.
Well, okay, so while you're walking around, do you keep notes? Do you have a notebook, or do you have a kind of dictaphone, or what, how do you manage to retain where you've walked?
I wish I had a dictaphone. That would be really cool, kind of, talking into the dictaphone. No, I'm a note taker. I would always have a little, moleskin equivalent small notebook, and I would just scribble stuff into it. And then what I would usually do is go into a cafe or something, and then read my scribbles and write them up properly. And then when I'd had this, several notepads of notebooks of scribbled notes, and also, weed drawings and, just things I've seen, bits of graffiti, signs, street names, and so on. And also photographs. I took a lot of photographs on my phone, because it is a great way of just documenting very quickly. I wasn't really doing it for artistic purposes. I was doing it for documenting the landscape. So I'd refer to those as well. And then when it came to actually writing the book, I would take those kind of rough notes, and I would incorporate them into a few pages of A4, which would be very beautifully written up. So I had the kind of scrawly rough notes, and then the kind of beautiful chapter plan, which I would try to follow.
Okay, well, I mean, something also is that throughout the book, you reveal a lot about yourself and your beliefs. So dare I ask you, was writing London Clay therapy?
I'm never very sure about the idea of writing being therapy. I think this is in my experience, writing about trauma, for example, merely reinforces the trauma, or kind of keeps you in that place that perhaps you don't want to be. I did have, so to those who haven't read the book, I write quite a lot about the loss of my mother when I was 13, and particularly in the early chapters, and actually also in the coda, that sort of haunts the journeys that I go on. And I don't really, I always knew that it was going to be in there, because I don't write from any particular authority. I'm not a historian. I'm not a geologist. I'm not a geographer. I'm a poet, and poets, I mean, God, we know nothing. We're sort of we're short-termist researchers. So I knew I needed something else that would give me a kind of authority. Well, it's like the wife of Bath says in the Canterbury Tale, authority versus experience. And I thought, well, if I've got no, academic authority to write London Clay, well, then I'll base it on my experience as a born and bred Londoner who has experienced loss, and who is, I suppose, obsessed with loss of landscape, loss of history, and so on. So that was sort of the premise I worked on. I didn't really I didn't know I was going to write so much personal material. That just sort of emerged as I went on, and I certainly didn't know that I would, for example, write about the births of both my kids. But I just felt as I went along, I wanted to write myself into the layers of the landscape in some sense.
Yeah. No, I think that's well, you did well. You
Thank
did
you.
well. What I've noticed that no questions yet, although Simon Cole has claimed he's on the River Lee right now, so
He's
that's
not. Fantastic. Is Simon on a boat? I wonder.
probably. But
Yeah.
yeah. So what I need to remind everyone is, do please, if you have a question for Tom, please pop it in the chat, and in a few minutes, we'll get over to your questions. So what uh, I, I mean, one of the things I'm always sort of kind of aware of is writing drafts over and over again.
Hmm.
Did you do that chapter by chapter, or did you do, the whole book and then tore it up and start again, or or is it, you didn't do any drafts at all?
All I can share is my experience of writing this particular book. I would not say that this is advice to anybody, and I do think that everyone writes differently. I think that I wrote this 400-page non-fiction book basically like a poet, in that I wrote very, very, very slowly, and I made sure that I was happy with every sentence or every paragraph before I moved on. It was achingly slow sometimes. I mean, I would come back from the library having written, the same sentence 10 times. But it did have the advantage that I didn't do a lot of redrafting. When a chapter was done, it was pretty much done. There were a couple of exceptions, one of which is that, and I've just actually been out here today leading a group of students from Camberwell School of Art down the River Walbrook through the City of London. I walked down the Walbrook 8 or 9 years ago doing these perambulatory audio walks, and at that time there's a little road called Walbrook which is on the Lost River, and when I was walking there 8 or 9 years ago, this big 1960s block called Bucklersbury House had been demolished, and the Museum of London archaeology team was down there in the pit, dredging up Roman archaeology from the old site of the Temple of Mithras, such extraordinary amounts of really important Roman archaeology that they dubbed it the Pompeii of the North. So 8 or 9 years ago, they were doing that. It was happening, and I wrote a bit about that in the chapter, but not a great deal. And then when I got to writing the actual book, I realised that I had to go back, because by that time, this is a couple of years ago, the building that they were putting up there, which is the headquarters of Bloomberg, the financial media company, they had resited this underground Roman temple, the Temple of Mithras, 7 meters below the street inside the new Bloomberg building. So I knew I had to go there, see this extraordinary immersive experience that they've got there. And I saw it today as well. And I needed to write about that. So I appended a section called Going Dark to the end of that chapter that had already effectively been written.
Well, for the Walbrook, you actually did an audio walk as well. So can we
Yeah.
tempt you to write more audio work or not?
I really love working with audio. I probably won't be doing the audio walks down Lost Rivers anymore because they're an awful lot of work. People say don't work with, is it children and animals? Well, I would say don't work with, sure you'll sympathise with this, Andrew, don't work with the city or a landscape of any kind that changes very quickly, and don't work with technology. It's an awful lot of work to do. So yeah, I would never say never. I will definitely make audio work again, but probably not Lost River stuff.
Okay, well, the good news is we've started to get a few questions in the chat. But I wondered, do
Fantastic.
you want to have a pause and read something from the book?
Good idea.
Uh,
Yeah.
if
I
you
was
read
wondering
something
what to
from the
read.
book, and then we'll come to the questions from the audience.
Yeah, that sounds great. I was wondering what to read because I do tend to read the same sections because they're sort of a good length and have a couple of jokes in them. So I'm going to read a bit that I have read a few times before. So if anyone's been to one of the events I've done, I really apologise for repeating myself. But it's probably my favourite. People sometimes ask me, what's your favourite bit of London that you explored in London Clay? And I mean, there's lots, but I'd be hard pushed not to say the Elephant and Castle. Now, that might surprise people who know London well, because the Elephant is not a salubrious district of London, although planners hope that it will be in a few years' time. So I'm going to take you to the Elephant, and this is where I actually found this, I think, one of the most interesting geological mysteries in the city, a place called the Rockingham Anomaly. But my plan in this chapter, which is called Dead River, is that I'm following the River Neckinger, which is one of the most elusive streams in South London. So I'll read a few minutes of this chapter. I crossed the dual carriageway as close to the course of the Neckinger as I can get without being run over. A double-decker bus pulls up with a groan and a passenger leaps on, exclaiming, "Yo, big life!" The shopping centre has been painted blue, but already the cladding is streaked with milky white water stains. The ground floor is sunk below street level and set back a few metres, creating a kind of concrete moat packed with tin-roofed market stalls, offering African and Caribbean food, computer parts, carpets, fruit and veg, and vinyl records. Entering through the double doors is like stepping back 30 years. Many of the shops look unchanged even from the 1960s. Greasy spoon cafes with formica tables, a hair salon full of old girls getting their perms fixed, a hardware store you could get lost in. The flecked tiled flooring looks like something geological, and there is an old-fashioned arcade machine or giant gobstopper dispenser around every corner. It makes my local shopping centre, the much-maligned Surrey Quays, seem positively futuristic. I buy a coffee at Sundial, a restaurant selling fried chicken and all-day breakfasts. A young mum with a baby strapped to her chest talks into her phone. "Hello? You're breaking up, Bear." Many of the shops here are independent small businesses run by first or second generation immigrants. A stall selling phone accessories proudly displays posters in its windows of great men and women of colour and kings and queens of Africa. Upstairs I find a Colombian restaurant and delicatessen, La Bodeguita, and a branch of the Jamaica National Bank. Outside, an elderly woman is explaining the origin of the phrase "to spend a penny" to a dreadlocked security card. "I'm still learning," he replies, and they both fall about laughing. I take a seat on a bench back downstairs. A man on crutches, wearing dark glasses and a New York baseball cap, joins me, and we immediately strike up conversation. His name is John. He lives in Spring Gardens, Vauxhall, and has been coming to the Elephant and Castle since he was 12. He is blind in one eye. He takes off his glasses, relies on an oxygen tank to breathe. He opens his rucksack to prove it, and has no toes on one foot. He points. Not being rude, but John begins every other sentence in this way. But I needn't be worried. He is excellent company. I tell him why I'm here, about my search for the dead river, and he nods sagely. I saw it once, that river. There was a burst water main on Brook Drive, and they dug it up. Not being rude, but it was quite a small pipe. A woman appears with a plastic cup containing a bright orange beverage, and he hands her a £1 coin. "Thanks, John," she says. John remembers the Lido too, the one behind the Imperial War Museum. He must have swum in it as a very young boy, just after the war. Since his mother died, John has visited the shopping centre every day, even after he had a fall on the escalator. "They offered £2,000 compensation," he said, "but I held out for 6. We exchange stories about growing up in South London, several generations apart, and I comment on how much the Elephant has changed, even in my lifetime. "They tried to knock this place down, but we won," John tells me, proudly. "I give it 2 more years. But many businesses have already moved out. The bowling alley and legendary bingo hall are out of bounds behind hoardings. Later, I read that the bulldozers are due to arrive in just 6 months' time. John is either optimistic or in denial. The Elephant has been dubbed gentrification's ground zero. it's hard to comprehend the pace or scale of change here. The shopping centre will make way for property developer Delancey's vision of a new town centre with luxury flats, retail units, and facilities for the London College of Communication. People like John do not appear in the artist's impressions of this future London. Have you seen the American Embassy? He asks. In Nine Elms? I tell him I haven't, not yet. You have to see it, Tom. It's got its own moat. I make my apologies, and as we shake hands, John leans in. Now, not being rude, he says, but if you want a cup of coffee, don't buy it from outside. It's too dear. Then he points. Go over there and say you're a mate of John's, and you might get a discount. As I head towards the exit, he calls after me. Good luck with the book.
That's great. Terrific. Thank you very much, Tom. And I remember reading that, and then only recently cycled around that area, and it is changing every week. It's unbelievable, the changes. Anyway, okay, we've got some questions. Michelle, would you like to undo your audio and say something, ask a question, or do you want me to read it out?
Yes, sure. Sure, yes. Apologies, my video doesn't seem to want to work, but can you hear me? Is the audio working?
Yeah, I can hear you, Michelle.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So I was wondering, obviously London being a large place, how do you like to travel the larger distances between the locations you write about, and how does this affect your walking mood? Are you a bus person, a tube person? How do you get about?
It's a good question, and in a sense, the question hides another question, which is, why didn't you write about other places in London? Because it is such a huge city, and you have to choose somewhere if you're going to write about it. There are lots of places I didn't write about, particularly places in outer London, which do necessitate a bit of a journey that I didn't get to. I tended to, I suppose, to take the tube to most places. I suppose the question is most pertinent really when it comes to the last couple of chapters, particularly the chapter that was written during lockdown, which is called "Beating the Bounds of Bermondsey." And for those who don't know London, Bermondsey is an old industrial working class part of southeast London, which used to be, 2,000 years ago, an island surrounded by marshlands. And I had this notion that I would beat the bounds of the old island, as if I was a priest on Rogation Sunday, and that I would perhaps even recruit some people, local people and artists and so on, to kind of walk around the island with me in some kind of ritual. And then, of course, lockdown came, and I couldn't do that. But I had the great advantage that I live in Rotherhithe, which is the next bit along from Bermondsey. So during lockdown, I was able to get out and actually walk that landscape. And I walked from my door, which was wonderful, actually, absolutely wonderful, not to have to travel by public transport. But it did mean that I was quite knackered when I got there, and I'd often get back quite late at night as well. So yeah, that was interesting. And then also the I think there's a romance to the sort of work that people who walk and write, psychogeographers and so on. There's a kind of there's a kind of resistant character to psychogeographers, and it's a cliche that I completely broke for the last chapter, which is about the River Lee, because I actually took a cab to get to the River Lee every single time I went there to walk, because this was only just after lockdown, and I wasn't taking any public transport at all. Like many of you, I'm sure I was being very cautious about COVID. So this bizarre sight of a psychogeographer with walking boots and a notepad hopping into an Addison Lee taxi to get to the River Lee, which is this amazing kind of post-industrial landscape. Yeah, I hope that slightly answers your question.
Thank you. Really, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, Sue Dawes, are you there? Can we hear you, Sue? You've got a question?
Yeah, sure. Given that you're a poet and probably sweat over every word, I wondered how long it took you from your initial idea to publication.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I alluded to it earlier. I did write the book pretty slowly, and I am obsessed with sentence structure and syntax in a way that can actually be quite unhelpful sometimes. I think also because I'm a professional editor, I find it quite hard to just free write. Um, so that is a skill I wish I had. In terms of the timeline, it was quite disjointed, and I don't think that's unusual, particularly with a non-fiction book. I had the idea, oh God, I mean, as I said, it came out of that project with Cape Farewell, but I mean, I think I got an agent in about 2014 initially. So I'd written 2 chapters and the introduction, 2014, maybe 2015. And then, as I said, that agent really messed me around. And then also, I had my first child in 2016. So that sort of came in the way, and I was very, very busy with work. And so I sort of gave up because the agent was rubbish, and then just disappeared. And so there was no real kind of incentive, and I was very busy. So I'd written these 2 chapters and the intro then. Then there was a huge gap until 2018, very late 2018, when I had a meeting with 2 brilliant women, one of whom runs a creative writing centre, and the other of whom is the director of the Museum of London. And they both said to me, because I hadn't seen them in a while, they both said to me individually, how's the book going? And I said, well, it's not, because my agents are blah, 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 moany. And they said, get off your ass and finish that bloody book. So I thought I would. And I managed to get another agent who was really, really positive and just wanted to support what I wanted to do rather than, make me feel anxious about it. And so I then just polished the pitch a bit. That went off very early 2019. And then I got a book deal within about a week, I think it was, and then started writing about spring 2019. And I was writing for 2 days a week for a year and a half. Yeah, 2 days a week, a year and a half. And that was to write 80% of the book.
That's a disciplined effort. That is very good. Okay, Helen Harradine. Helen, you've actually got 2 questions. Which one are you going to choose? Are you going to roll them into one?
I'll just go with my second one, I think. Hello. What
Hi,
are your
hello.
thoughts? Hi. What are your thoughts on walking and how that helps you process grief and the loss of your mother?
I think at the time, I mean, so the second chapter in the book is called Return to the Source. And in that chapter, I wanted to go back to, where it all began for me, back to South London, and to think about the relationship between the loss of my mum and the landscape that I called home back then, but also the landscape that I did obsessively walk. And in particular, I mean, the thing is, you don't call it obsessively walk, or you don't call it psychogeography when you're a teenager. You call it playing truant. That's what it is. I used to bunk off school and go and smoke fags in the local woodland. So I write a bit about that in the book, and I think that was really important for me at the time. Many years later, I don't think I'm in that same place. But I certainly would say that walking remains a huge stress reliever for me, a way of living in the present, being in the present, but not just any old walking. There's a particular kind of walking that I was trying to do in the book, which was very kind of observant, and taking my time. Sometimes not. Sometimes walking really fast. And there are bits in the book that I describe where I'm walking against the clock or walking in rubbish weather. But a lot of the time, I was walking quite slowly and giving myself the time and the permission to stop and pause and look very closely and carefully at things, and disappearing down into alleyways and going on deviations and all of that kind of stuff, that I think is really important. And I think like anything that demands complete attention from your mind, I think that is a gift to the other side of you, the side that is thinking about work and kids or health or whatever it might be, the world as it is.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And I like how you said it's definitely being present as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah,
a lot of people feel that about walking.
yeah. I think so, and I think in that sense, it is not. I don't think walking, for me, has some kind of special privileged place above other activities that demand that kind of presence. Um, so, for example, you could get it from doing a jigsaw, or I don't know, doing ceramics. I think there are so many activities that that we need, hobbies and so on, that we need to 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 fight that kind of that like attention deficit that particularly in the screen age, so many of us are suffering from.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Helen. Great question. Got Tom to talk a lot there. That was excellent.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll need you to take over being chair next time. Okay, Amelia has a question too. Amelia?
Hello.
Hi, hello.
Hi. Hello. You've mentioned a couple of things that didn't go quite right, like the lockdown and the agents and everything. But I wondered, in terms of the research and the walks and really sort of wrangling what you were finding out and seeing, was there anything that you kind of came across that was a bump in the road, or that surprised you, or threw things off course a bit?
Oh, that's a really good question. But can I also commend you on your sign behind you, Haringey Park, with the double R
Yeah.
and the A, not the single
Yeah,
R and E.
an original.
Yeah, my dad lives in Haringey, and he's obsessed
All
with
right.
that particular oddity about Haringey. Yeah, God, it's a really tricky question. Were there bumps in the road apart from lockdown? I feel like pretty much every chapter was just constant bumps in the road, in the sense that you would set out to find something or to see something, some evidence of something that lies beneath, that is invisible, and sometimes it feels a bit like I was talking the third horse. I hope that doesn't come across too much in the writing, or at least if it does, that I find ways out of it, because there is so much to observe, even if you're not finding, the holy grail, as it were. I mean, some of them as well, are very elusive. The Neckinger I mentioned before is a very tricky river, and it's hard to tell where it goes, and so on. There were places that I didn't go to that I would have liked to have gone to. I really wanted to take a kayak down the River Lee, so I could get to some of the more hard to get places, but it was just, the timing was terrible. There was no way I could have done it in summer 2020. Equally, there are places I would have liked to have gone underground more, and that's something that's been commented on in the book. Yes, and I would have liked, for example, to explore a place called Dead Dog Hole, which is it's sort of an overhang on the Regent's Canal somewhere near Camden, I think, and it's part of some old stables and sort of underground structures, and I would have liked to have gone there. I'm not that brave, that's something that really comes across in the book. I'm not Robert McFarlane, it's I'm I'm fat and slow and a chicken. So yeah, I didn't do as many kind of hair raising things as I would like. Although I did walk a lot around South Bermondsey at night, which I think gives me some street cred. Does anyone else have a question? Oh, Simon's asking. Simon, do you want to ask your question? Hopefully Andrew will rejoin us momentarily.
Yeah, if you can hear me okay.
I can, Simon. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm really enjoying this. I wondered if you felt any pressure to come up with something original, because this is a tradition that goes back centuries of people walking London.
Yes,
and I know I have these epiphanies and they take me years, and then I think, actually, you know what? I've probably Dickens had this moment, and like all the other at this moment. And so did you feel any pressure to, like, I'm writing about London, I must find something new and different?
Yes, I really did. And in a sense, you've answered your own question, because it is impossible. Of course, it's impossible. There are so many brilliant writers who've been there, done it, got on the T-shirt, and Ian Sinclair, he's he's a personal friend of mine. He's a hero of mine. Fantastic writer. He sneaks his way into the book in a couple of chapters, but ultimately you've just got to say I'm doing something different, and I am. I mean, Ian's work is much more linguistically innovative than mine. It takes more risks with narrative. Mine's much more traditional in lots of ways. And I'm also, for me, the original thing is the geology. The only person I can think of who's really done that in London is a guy called Nick Papadimitriou. But even then, he's done it in a slightly different way, and again, a different style. So, when my agent said, the first bad agent said to me, this is a saturated market, London landscape books. That stuck in my head a long time, much longer than it needed to, and I had to I had to sort of work myself emotionally out of that. And when difficult bits happened, when I had those sort of dark nights of the soul, and I was, tearing my hair out, moaning at my other half about, some structural issue or other, of course, my mind, because it's weak, went back to thinking, oh, why am I doing this book? Someone else should be doing this. Why should one thing was, why should another white man be doing this? White middle class man be doing this? Why should I be? What's my authority to do this, etc., etc. But ultimately, I thought, well, I've got an idea. The idea is that it's about geology. It's a little bit like what people who've done Lost Rivers, like Tom Bolton, have done. But it's not like that, because it's completely different stylistically, and I'm also looking at Lost Islands and so on. And I'm very much about. So some of you may know Tom Bolton, who again is a friend of mine, and he is the man when it comes to Lost Rivers, and I use his work quite a bit in my book, or credited. Often I'm disagreeing with him about stuff, but where we're different is that I'm interested in London clay and trying to write imaginatively to conjure this kind of magical side of the city, whereas Tom is much more analytical and interested in social history and documenting things very clearly. I'm much more interested in the kind of in my own capricious take on the landscape, and trying to combine that with the geological stuff. So yeah, sorry, very long answer short. Yes, I did think about that a lot, and ultimately I still wrote the book, so I don't know what to say.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Hi Tom, it's Jerry.
Hi Jerry, how are you? Lovely to see you.
Yeah, fine. I want to say, do you think you've done with London now, or do you think there's another book in there somewhere?
I'm certainly not done with London as an individual, and they will take me out in a box. But in terms of writing about London, I don't at the moment think that I want to write another non-fiction book about London. I think it's quite hard to follow up something which has such a kind of clear and hopefully unique spin on London. I think London Clay 2, well, for starters, wouldn't sell. So I don't think so. There are other things I want to do with landscape, and particularly with rivers. So I do have another book that I can't talk about, not for legal reasons, but just because it will sound rubbish until I finish the proposal. But I also, I can see myself writing maybe some fiction. I would love, I've written fiction a little bit over the years, just for my own, not pleasure as such, but just to see if I could do it. And the jury's still out, but I would like to give that a real go. And I think, given my interest in history, it would probably be historical London fiction, possibly medieval or possibly 18th century. So I think I'm not done with London and writing, but I think non-fiction wise, I think this is it.
Well, I would certainly look forward to that.
Thank you. Thanks, Jerry.
So should we warn CJ Sampson that he's going to have a on the bookshelves? That'd be great. Okay, well now, Tom, a big thank you.